Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest EP from Carly Rae Jepsen called E.MO.TION Side B. You know, I'm seriously starting to rethink my whole rule about not covering EPs. And really, it's not even so much a rule, but a guideline I gave myself to avoid getting swamped by the never-ending stream of artists looking to show off their newest bundle of songs. And it's one that I've been willing to break at least a couple of times a year. At this point, it's borderline arbitrary, one minor stopgap to prevent my schedule from becoming completely overloaded. But believe it or not, I did actually used to have a reason why I didn't cover a lot of EPs. I like covering albums with thematic arcs and concepts and the drive to put together a self-contained idea. And my general thinking is that you couldn't usually pull that off with an EP with 2 to 3 songs. But in an era where I've seen EPs longer than some albums, hell, Isaiah Rashad's Sylvia demo was nearly 50 minutes long, or loaded with 8 or 9 songs, the more you get the impression that artists themselves are calling EPs a stopgap, something to hold time before official releases, but where they can push out their extras while using that as a gentle excuse to not judge them that harshly. And in a sense, that's kind of fine. That's why most EPs were released in the first place. Fragments and teasers for hardcore fans who are craving more between albums. And yet, in the digital era, where we're no longer bound by space on a disc, EPs have just been getting longer and longer, or supplemented by the mixtape scene. So I'm left with a quandary. Continue to ignore EPs except when I really want to highlight a neat song, or break the rule altogether to dig into Carly Rae Jepsen's E.MO.TION Side B, a project that doesn't even attempt to hide that it's full of extras from that pretty damn good synth-pop album from last year. And yet, given how many critics are saying that it was actually even better than E.MO.TION, okay, I was curious. At the very least, Carly Rae Jepsen's got some serious competition in 2016 thanks to Shura's excellent debut album, Nothing's Real, that dropped a few months back. And given that it is a pop album, Carly Rae Jepsen probably isn't going to be bothering with a core theme or idea anyway. So okay, whatever, I was curious and looking for some good synth pop right about now. So, with E.MO.TION Side B, did I get it? Well, yeah, it's pretty good. But again, if I hadn't got the swarm of requests for this release, I probably would have just skipped over this EP and gone straight to Isaiah Rashad or De La Soul album reviews that, yes, they're coming up. Basically, you like E.MO.TION? Here's more of it. A gleaming tribute to late 80s synth pop and R&B that's pretty damn catchy and well executed enough to slip right into the joy receptors of your brain. It doesn't hit the highs of the first E.MO.TION, but the tighter construction also means it avoids the lows and probably adds up to a more cohesive project as a whole. In other words, while it is indeed good, I'm not sure it's got that additional weight across the board to make it, say, as strong as Sure as Nothing's Real. Now, some of you are probably already a little bit annoyed that I've referenced that album twice already, but if you've heard them both at this point, you really can't ignore the comparison. Carly Rae Jepsen has more energy and color than Shura, but arguably less personality and character in the lyrics and vocals. The broad strokes are that she's a girl riding the waves of relationships, with songs more driven by emotional logic and through line than any sort of thinking. Hell, on Body Language, she flat out says that they might be overthinking things. And sure, it's not precisely a mature approach to songwriting, but there's something to capturing that whirlwind of conflicting emotion on these songs, from the reunion with an old flame on First Time to her own hesitation on The One, where it's a comfortable situation and yet she doesn't want to face the pressure of being that one for that person, even as her own feelings are starting to creep into the situation. What's very telling about E.MO.TION Side B is its sense of emotional honesty. The breakup tracks like Fever and Roses are pretty blunt about lingering residual feelings, and the album's standout Cry shows her own frustration that her partner won't open up in the same way. Granted, when you follow it with Store, a song where she's trying to leave her partner and play it as light and gentle as possible, strikes me as a tad too cutesy, pushing for openness and yet not always being completely honest with herself. And while I do think she does know that, she's almost letting herself off the hook a little bit, which can feel a little exasperating for me. Granted, that's if you want run with the impression that Carly Rae Jepsen is playing the same character across this album, and I'm not quite certain that she is. A lot of this has to do with a lot of the vocal production, which alternates between being very sparse and isolating her in the mix like on Roses, or the heavier multi-tracking that you see on Cry or Body Language or Higher, or the more outright synthetic vocal production on The One. And that's not counting the fact that Carly Rae Jepsen brings her versatility even further to the forefront here, alternating between coos and belting across her entire range depending on what's needed for the song. And yet, there's a small part of me that feels that the chameleon instinct might not serve her for a full project. Granted, it was more evident on E.MO.TION than here, and on some level it's kind of expected for a pop act, but it plays to an identity that doesn't quite feel feel as solid and defined as I would like. Not helped by writing that tends to avoid a lot of greater detail to flesh the story out. Again, yeah, it's pop, I get a desire for universality, but there's a part of me that wants to see more color to Carly Rae Jepsen's character. It's interesting, she's kind of captivating as a character, I want to hear more. Granted, it helps that the production plays up a lot of that personality, that you don't need a lot of detail. All bass-touched new wave grooves with layers of glossy synthesizers, tight rhythms, and hints of guitar to add a hint of bite. And while you don't get any wonderful melodic moments like the horn that opens up Run Away With Me, the only place where the stock Aiken and Waterman-esque overloading in the mix comes through is on Higher. Interestingly, the one song that Carly Rae Jepsen didn't write on this album, and even then, it's only on the hook, especially considering how strong that low groove can feel in that song, otherwise pretty much redeeming it. Hell, if you're looking for the one instrumental element that characterizes this album, it's that low synth and bass groove. From the One to Cry to the subtler Foundation on Roses, or the trembling double tap of the beat on Store, or the flat buzzy waves of synth playing off the heavier beat on Body Language. That said, this album does have a few instrumental moments I really did like. The heavy multi-track against the subtle guitar touches on Cry, and especially those heavier synth notes that drive the pre-chorus and hooks on Fever. Perfect way to really connect with me. I really dug that song. I will say that I do wish some of these beats and melodies got a little bit more room to breathe. For as good as they are, this record could have really shone if the mid-range opened up a little bit more to match that thicker synth foundation, or add a little bit more gloss or sparkle or instrumentation that wasn't just more synthesizers. But really, that's nitpicking on an otherwise perfectly fine pop EP, which for me is roughly on par with the album that was released last year. Granted, in a year where Shura dropped a similar record with more subtlety, sharper writing, better hooks, gorgeous production, E.MO.TION side B can feel a little bit slight at points. But you know what? It's pop music. It's allowed to be slight. So for me, I'm thinking a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation, especially if you like E.MO.TION, because almost for certain you will like this. Otherwise, if you're somehow still on the fence with Carly Rae Jepsen, well, okay, she's the Canadian equivalent of Robin, and if that doesn't win you over, I don't think anything will. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm honestly a little bit amazed that I'm even bothering to cover this album, but hey, enough of you asked for it. So I got the poll up here. So how many of you guys really liked it, or do you think it just kind of fell a little bit flat in terms of emotion? Because I get the feeling that some people without the huge instrumental standouts, they might not like this quite as much. But moving beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I will see you next time.